together?
Yep.
Again, that's Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend of the victim in this case that we're covering here. That the victim, Nicole Vanderheide, that was Douglas Dietrich, and the person who's on trial right now is George Burch. We have a lot to talk about with this case, including the DNA evidence that came in. I want to bring in real quick our guest for this morning, criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor Vinoo Varghese. Vinoo, great to see you.
Good to see you, Jesse.
I want to talk a little bit. We haven't had a chance to talk about this case. As before we go into our quick break in the morning, what are your general impressions about this case?
It's an interesting case. I mean, you know, it's very rare that a defense in this kind of case actually has a theory. So here you have a theory that somebody else did it, and that's the person who's testifying for the state. And it's, you know, I think the defense attorneys have laid a pretty good foundation for a lot of their stuff.
Well, I can't wait to see where they go, because what we know and what the jury doesn't is why they are saying Douglas Dietrich is the murderer in this case. We heard the defense with an opening statement say that George Burch, their client, didn't do it, but we don't really understand why they say that. But we know what the jury doesn't, that they are claiming that George Burch met Nicole that night, had sex with her outside of her home, and he was knocked out by Douglas Dietrich. We're going to talk all about this after this short commercial break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. We have a big day today because we are covering the George Burch case out of Wisconsin, and we expect a live feed at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you don't want to miss anything in this case. There's so much at stake in this case, and the reason that the nation has taken attention to this case is for multiple reasons. One, because of the story. When you have a defendant, George Burch, who's on trial for the murder of a beautiful young mother named Nicole Vanderheide, and despite an overwhelming evidence against him, he's pointing the finger at an additional suspect and an alternative suspect. And not just any suspect, but the victim's boyfriend. That's what makes this juicy. But not just that. Because this case is unique in the fact that Fitbit data, that's right, Fitbit data, people wear Fitbits, can be used to track someone's location. And who am I talking about? The boyfriend in this case, Douglas Dietrich. We are saying this because the defense didn't want that data in, because a Fitbit can track where you move and where you can sleep. Now, the judge in this case said you can bring in data to show where people move, but you can't use it to show where people sleep. So in other words, Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend, the prosecution will say, well, his Fitbit data can be used and we'll show where he was. And he wasn't the killer in this case, but it was George Burch. The defense didn't want that in. Let's talk a little bit more about it. Again, I'm here with criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor Vinoo Varghese. Fitbit data, okay? We separate it into step counting data and we separate it into sleep tracking data. Why is this such a big issue? Why has this caught the nation's attention because of this Fitbit data?
Well, I think the first thing is Fitbit's very popular, right? So
it is very popular. Can't deny that.
I think that's the reason why this is so interesting. I think the issue, and this is what people need to be careful about when they look at science. In 2009, the National Academy of Sciences released a report that said that that prosecutors throughout the country have been overstating the qualifications of its expert witnesses. So what it showed is that most of what's going on in the courts over the last 20 years has been junk science. And in fact, just 2 years ago, the FBI released a study that was co-authored with the ACLU and the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers that showed that hair analysis was false, that a number of people had been sent to jail based upon hair fiber analysis and all this stuff. So what it's showing is that even the last couple of years right now, particularly in the last year, just in the last few months in New York City, the New York City Crime Lab has come under fire because of DNA and unsound methods. So the larger issue, while we're talking about Fitbit and all this other stuff, is the science, the actual reality behind these sciences. And a lot of them are just not sound. And a lot of these people that testify for the state have really, they engage in what applicants do when they apply for a job. They puff up their resume.
Sure, and that's really why we see the sleep counting data not coming in yet, because that issue's still not resolved, or whether or not it's reliable. But it seems that step counting data, the judge feels, is reliable, tracking where people went. And if the prosecution can show, well, look, this is where Douglas Dietrich was in the night in question. He wasn't in the crime scene. He wasn't where her body was found, but George Burch was. How is the defense going to fight that?
Well, I think that they would have to call somebody to challenge the question, the validity of the step data
of the Fitbit.
Right.
Okay.
So that's what they're going to have to do.
Okay.
Right. They're going to say that, look, this is this isn't reliable, and I bet you they'll be able to find people that can say that. The question is, I don't know how deep Mr. Burch's pockets go, because this is going to cost him a lot of money.
Well, what we do know is that everybody's watching this case, and one of the reasons we're watching this case, stand by, Vinoo, is the reason because of Douglas Dietrich. When you have this kind of sordid triangle between three different people, because what George Burch and his team are saying is that George Burch slept with Nicole in the night in question, and Douglas Dietrich knocked him out. And while he was knocked out, Douglas killed Nicole. George wakes up, and Doug points a gun at his face and forces him to get rid of the body. Process that for a second, because that really is the defense's theory, and we haven't seen how they're going to do it yet. We believe that George Burch will take the stand, and that is how the case will be presented. I want to show you right now Douglas Dietrich. This is him testifying last week, explaining a little bit about what happened when Nicole went missing, and I want you to listen very carefully. Is this a bad boyfriend, or is this somebody else that has something to hide? Take a look.
Do you recall what your energy level was at that point in time?
Kind of drunk and tired. I had quite a bit to drink that night, and I was just kind of exhausted of, not being able to get a hold of Nikki, kind of frustrated and tired,
After Dallas left, what did you do?
I went upstairs, got ready for bed, took out my contacts, brushed my teeth as I do every night, and I think I went back downstairs, made an ice water. I don't know if I did that before taking my contacts out and brushing my teeth, but and then went to bed, and remember laying in bed, and I called Dallas shortly after 3 o'clock and talked to her, and she said she had not heard from Nikki at that point yet, and that she was almost home.
What was your purpose in calling Dallas?
To see if she had heard from Nikki yet, because it was after bar time, and figured if Nikki was staying out till bar close or something, that she should be coming home at soon thereafter, around that point.
What time did you fall asleep?
Right after I talked to Dallas, which is right around 3, a little after 3.
Do you recall when you woke up the next day?
I know it was probably between 6:30, I would guess, about.
What caused you to wake up?
Dylan was crying, and it was at a point where he had to eat every 3 to 4 hours. He was still breastfeeding, and I went downstairs and grabbed Nikki had pre-pumped a couple packets of breast milk, and I warmed that up, and I was hungover and kind of dazed, and went right back up to bed and grabbed him in bed with me and fed him the bottle, and we both went back to sleep for a few hours.
And did you make any attempts to contact Nikki at that point?
No, I don't believe so. I don't recall. That was.
When was the next time you wake up, if you remember?
I think, I don't know, a few hours later, 3-4 hours later, around 10:30, 11, I'm guessing.
That's Douglas Dietrich. Now, you be the judge. Is that a boyfriend who just is not concerned about Nicole Vanderheiden, the victim in this case? Or is this somebody who had something to hide and knew where the body was because he was the one responsible for her death? That's what the defense wants to point this as, and the prosecution's going to fight it. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. We are waiting for a live feed out of our big case for the day, a case that has captured the nation's attention. It's a case out of Wisconsin. It's the case of George Burch. Now, we do expect a live feed in the courtroom today as testimony continues at around 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. As soon as we have a feed, we're going to make sure to go to it. This is a first-degree murder case about a man killing a young mother, but he's saying he did it. He's saying he did not do it, excuse me, but that it was the boyfriend of the victim. Classic case of pointing the finger at somebody else. A lot to talk about here. Again, I'm here with criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor Vinoo Varghese. Vinoo, what I love about having you here is I can get both perspectives, the prosecutor perspective and the defense's perspective. I want to go for the prosecutor perspective. They're putting on their case right now. The state's putting on their case. How do you think they're doing so far at A, pointing the finger at George Burch, and B, saying Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend, didn't do it?
I think as far as A goes, they're doing fine. I don't think there's any issue there. Case is proceeding along. They're presenting their evidence. But B is a little bit of an issue.
Okay.
Their own witness, this woman, Dallas Kennedy, it was the Vanderheiden's babysitter that evening.
Because we know that Doug and Nicole shared a young child together, a young son.
And so she was, she testified. And during her testimony, she ended up becoming sort of a hostile witness to some extent because she started testifying about the fact that the relationship between the two was not so great. And once that happened, there was a comment, basically the prosecution tried to shut her down. And I think this portends a greater problem for the prosecution as the case proceeds, because there are other things out there, particularly with Dietrich. The judge in this case, Zukowski, John Zukowski, is a very interesting guy, because for the defense, there couldn't have been a worse pick for them.
Why?
He's the former district attorney of that county for 30 years. The man was a district attorney.
And why is that a problem for the defense?
Well, he was the guy who ran the prosecution's office for 30 years. And,
So cynical. So cynical.
And here's the thing that I think is really problematic. There's something about his decision denying a motion made by the defense. The defense sought to introduce, or at least elicit questioning about Dietrich's domestic violence history, because Dietrich, subsequent to the killing, was in a car, or there's an allegation that he was in a car with his ex's sister, who's now watching, and apparently they're living together and they're watching the baby together. And there's an allegation that he touched her sexually, and then when she turned him away, that he, basically, kidnapped her for a while.
Okay, so let's get this straight. Douglas Dietrich, who's everybody's watching right there, that's footage of him testifying. He is alleged to have been in the car with the victim's sister, touched her sexually in an inappropriate way, and wouldn't let her out of the car.
Correct.
Now, the jury's not going to hear any of that.
Yes, and that's a problem, because here's why, and this was the judge's words in his decision. The decision said that this would prejudice the state's case, and that it would cause undue prejudice to the state's case. And here's the problem with that decision, is that he's looking at the two parties as equals, and they're not. And no matter what they say, and there's an instruction that they say that the defendant's presumed innocent, that's not true. Okay? The fact that he's sitting in the courtroom means there's no presumption of innocence. So no matter how much they say that to a jury, everybody's walking in there believing this guy did something.
Okay.
Okay, so that's just the reality of it. As defense lawyers, you have to counter that, and you have to put forth a narrative that he didn't do it, somebody else did.
So as we look at this, we're hearing split opinions. Some people are looking at Douglas Dietrich and saying this guy's aloof. This guy doesn't know what's going on. Other people are looking at it and saying that anytime he shows emotion on the stand, it's fake tears. We don't believe what he's saying. He's hiding something, because usually in cases you go after the boyfriend and the husband, not a complete stranger like George Burch. What I want to play for you right now is some of his cross-examination, where I have to tell you, a good cross-examination is a good thing to find. And you're really hearing the defense attorneys hammering away at this witness, who they believe is the real person that killed Nicole Vanderheiden. Take a look.
I didn't know she wasn't there at that point. When I went out there, I thought she was either talking to another group of friends. She had introduced me to at least two groups of friends. There was a Nicole Dillon, and I think one of her friends that we had met earlier before the Steel Panther had played in between Annex Plane. We had met them in the center room and had a brief, introduction chat and whatever. Her and Nikki talked about some things that I didn't really know about, and then I think that was right before the band was about to play or whatever. And so, I mean, she knew people there, so I was figuring she was somewhere about. There was a lot of people there, so it wasn't like there's 10 people and you can say, oh, she's not here, and I was not even thinking about that. I figured she was somewhere around, or in the bathroom.
And Greg finally talked to you about leaving the watering hole?
After that was after I talked to Nikki, and then after talking with Greg and Katie, and had ordered some drinks. I don't know at what point I had checked my phone, and all of a sudden I noticed I had a couple of texts that came like out of nowhere, and I was like shocked. What's going on here? And I responded to that, and then.
So Doug actually had texted you, I'm going to pick you up in 5 minutes outside of the watering hole. And then a few minutes later, he texted you, get outside now.
Who texted me?
Greg.
Who texted me?
Greg?
Oh, Greg. At some point, what time? I don't know. What time are you referring to?
When you were leaving the watering hole.
When we actually left, or when we were kind of like on our way out the door?
Whenever Greg texted you.
I don't recall when he exactly texted me, but he did say something. He went outside. I didn't know where his car was parked, and I think I was still talking or finishing up my drink with that group of friends at that corner of the bar right by the front entrance door.
So if Greg texted you to come outside in 5 minutes, and then soon after texted you to get the fuck outside now, would you agree that that's a pretty sudden change in tone?
Again, that's Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend of the victim in this case, Nicole Vanderheiden, a beautiful young mother out of Wisconsin, who was taken in the prime of her life. And right now, we're trying to decide, well, we're not, we're merely covering it, but the jury is deciding who did this. Was it George Burch, the man who's on trial? Or was it somebody else, and possibly Douglas Dietrich, who the defense is pointing the finger at? We have to talk a little bit more about this right now. Vinoo, I want to talk a little bit about Douglas Dietrich, because he was the main person on the stand last week, the most important witness, I would say. His demeanor, okay? Here's a guy, seems to get into a fight with his girlfriend the night before. She goes missing. She eventually winds up dead. Do you hear the defense really hammering away on the fact that you didn't care where she was? We know later on that he didn't call for a missing persons report until maybe 17 hours later, hadn't seen her. He was up in the middle of the night, did his nighttime routine, fed the baby in the middle of the night, never contacted Nicole.
It's a good thing he fed the baby.
It's a good thing he fed the baby. But is that just a bad boyfriend? Or is that somebody, or not even a bad boyfriend, somebody who gets into a fight with their significant other and you don't care where they are? Maybe she slept at a friend's house. I knew she might be coming home later. Or do you sense that maybe there's something more here?
There were texts between the two of them that are coming in. The defense fought to have in, and there are texts indicating that she was angry with him, and that at one point she says something to the extent of, "I found somebody," and he said, "Hold on, I'm coming." That actually supports the defense theory.
Meaning it could be George Burch.
Right. It could have been that she hooked up with George Burch, and that at some point he says, "Hold on, I'm coming." So maybe at some point he's having a good time. They're all at these bars, and she's having a good time. And at a certain point, the defense theory I think is going to be that he snapped it, he lost it when he caught the two of them together.
Isn't that a classic strategy, though? You say, okay, you have a boyfriend. He was maybe cheating. He was flirting. He didn't really care about her. She, in text, said that he was a bad boyfriend. That could be very well true, but not every bad boyfriend is a killer. Then again, the flip side of it is, when you look at this case, and the defense says this was a random act of violence, George Burch came along and killed this woman, didn't know her beforehand, hooked up with her and then killed her. What makes more sense? Or maybe not even hooked up with her and killed her. But the point is, he was a random act of violence. Or what makes more sense here? Somebody that knew Nicole, was in an intimate relationship with her, shared a child with her. They were having some difficulties in their relationship. They were having financial difficulties. And maybe he had a motive to kill her. I mean, at the end of the day, you're looking at jurors and they're trying to look for common sense, no?
Absolutely. And I think the prosecution is going to say, and there's going to be instruction, they don't have to explain why this happened, right? So what you're saying is actually critical to the defense.
But everybody likes a good story.
Well, this is what I'm saying. The prosecution will say that we don't have to prove why, but everything's about why. Why did this happen? Why would Burch kill her?
Yeah.
Right? If they hooked up, why? There's no connection. There's a hookup, right? So why is he killing her? And this isn't a guy who has, a history of violence, though he was once tried for murder.
Let's talk about that. So here's a guy who's been on trial twice in his lifetime for murder. Now, it was a little bit different. Okay, the first time...
Quite a bit different.
Very different. The first one was a gang-related shooting. This is about the killing of a young woman, a young mother. Different things. But when you have a guy who's on trial twice for murder in your lifetime, does that say something to you about him, maybe his lifestyle? But thinking if he was acquitted on that charge, why couldn't he be acquitted here? Maybe it's just a bad luck.
You know, some guys just have bad luck. I mean, here's the thing. If they were anything similar, look, if he had been on trial for the murder of a girlfriend or a woman, you know, then we'd all be thinking about this.
Right, the jury can't hear any of this.
Sure, which is the correct decision. And this is why I want to go back to Judge Zukowski's decision not to allow evidence of this domestic violence incident. And he said in his decision, quote, "The problem, however, is that any probative value of the evidence of these events is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice to the state and the risk of confusing the issues and or misleading the jury." And he talks about it being uncharged crimes. He's correct. On one hand, he's correct, the judge. This is an uncharged crime.
You're talking about Douglas Dietrich.
I'm talking about Douglas Dietrich.
Right.
And I'm talking about why Dietrich's domestic violence allegation should come in versus why it shouldn't come in for the defendant. Look, Douglas Dietrich is not the one on trial, right? It's the defendant. It's the defendant who's going to be facing, life in jail and, for the rest of his life. It's not Dietrich, at least not yet, right?
Right.
So the issue with Dietrich is this: he's got an open case. I've dealt with this when I was many years ago when I was a prosecutor, and I was prosecuting a gang assault case. This is a long time ago, but the complainant, the person, and I don't like to use the term victim, but that's a prosecutor's term. But the complainant, the person who said he was attacked, had an open criminal case. So the defense was allowed to ask about that. Of course, he took the fifth on the stand because it was a pending case. That's what the judge should have allowed here. Because think about it. If you're on that jury and you vote to convict him, and then you find out afterwards that the main witness, the guy who the defense saying had done this, was...
You're like, why didn't I have that information before I made my decision?
It makes sense.
Right.
Let the jury decide and let the prosecutor argue why it's not relevant.
The jury right now, all they have to judge Douglas Dietrich is what he said and what he was on the stand and what will be coming forward when George Burch and the defense take their case and move forward. That's what they're going to have to decide. They're looking at him in the stand as the same way we're looking at him and trying to see if he's lying. Is he being credible? Is he hiding something? Is this was just an innocent boyfriend or something more? That's what they have to decide. And again, we are waiting for a live feed in the courtroom. As soon as we do have it, we'll make sure to go to it. And we expect today to be a very important day, as it is each and every day, especially as the state is trying to build a case against George Burch and trying to say Douglas Dietrich didn't do it. What I want to play for you right now again is some cross-examination of Douglas Dietrich from last week. And again, you have to think the defense attorneys were having some fun here, really going after this witness, because this is not just any witness. This is the same person that they're claiming is the real killer in this case. And when you get that person on the stand, you have an opportunity to ask them a whole sort of questions. Take a look.
What about when you smoked weed at the watering hole?
It was one of those vape pens or whatever they call them, and it was I don't know, being like passed around in the crowd, and somebody handed it to me. I don't recall who, and I did take a puff off it.
And you gave Greg your Adderall earlier on May 20th?
I don't recall giving him any of mine, but I don't know.
And then you snorted that amphetamine with Greg at the sardine can?
No, I did not at the sardine can. I mean, are you talking about inside, or what do you? What do you mean?
When did you snort amphetamine with Greg or Adderall with Greg?
I'm trying to recall if I did, because I remember saying to Greg, I don't want to snort any. I don't like that. I do have a prescription for it, and I do take it regularly. The correct way to, and just ingest it. I take it daily, and I just don't like typically snorting anything. So.
But you snorted it on that night, that morning.
I think at some point I did. I don't know if it was like when we were leaving the watering hole, or when we had just maybe gotten to the sardine can. We parked in that back bank parking lot. I think it might have been then. I just don't totally recall when I did.
So you snorted Adderall with Greg?
I think I did a little bit. certain on that, though.
I'm just looking for a yes or no answer. You snorted amphetamine with Greg.
It's hard to, I mean, from all the stories and everything I've heard afterwards, and like, I just don't know. I mean, I would lean towards yes, but I just don't specifically recall that me actually doing it. I remember the opportunity to, and I do remember saying no, that I wasn't going to, but I think because there was like 2 times, and I know one time I said no for sure, and maybe I think the one time I did, and I don't know when that was, I think either when we left the watering hole, or it was in Greg's car, I believe.
And then moving back to when you're at your house, Greg eventually left.
Yeah, after a short time period of us being there.
Dallas left.
Yep, a short time after Greg left.
And then you testified yesterday that you did your nighttime routine.
Yes.
What is that?
Basically, getting a glass of ice water, brushing my teeth, taking my contacts out, washing my face, and then getting ready for bed. Just undressing.
And then you testified that you woke up the next morning. When was that?
I don't know the exact time, but I think it was between like 6 and 7, like 6:30, I'm guessing.
So roughly that's 8 hours since you had saw Nikki, according to your testimony.
Yeah, that would be, I think it was about, I'm guessing around 11 o'clock that I had last seen her.
You did not call the police at 6:30.
No,
You did not call Nicole's sister at 6:30.
no,
You did not call Nicole's mother at 6:30.
no, I did not.
You didn't call any of your friends at 6:30.
No, I did not.
You didn't call your parents.
Nope,
You didn't call your brother.
no, I did not.
You just went back to bed.
Yeah, I was tired, I was hungover, and had a crying baby, and took care of him and fed him and went back to bed right away.
And you knew where Nikki was at that time.
No, I did not.
And then you woke up again around 11.
Yeah, I think approximately 11 o'clock.
And now it had been 12 hours since you had last seen Nikki.
Correct.
She still wasn't home for Dylan.
No, she was not.
Did you search for Nikki on foot or by vehicle?
No, I did not.
Still didn't call the police.
I did not at that time, no.
Because you knew you didn't have to.
I don't know what I was starting to get concerned, and, because I figured she was out, if she stayed out late, that, she was probably going to sleep in as well, and probably feeling it similar to me, hungover and tired, that she was going to, sleep it off, that, we had a lot to drink that night.
You finally called police around 4:30. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
And that's 17 hours since you last saw her.
Yeah, I think so, yep.
And that's also after her body was already found.
Yeah, at that time, and afterwards I did, yeah, that would be after.
And that's after a large police buildup off Hoffman Road.
Yeah, I was unaware of that police buildup until well after the fact.
You knew you didn't have to. That's the defense attorney grilling the victim's boyfriend in the George Burch case out of Wisconsin, which we're monitoring closely. And as soon as we have a live feed in that courtroom, we're going to make sure to go to it. Again, I'm here with criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Vinoo Varghese. Vinoo, we know what the prosecution's been doing, but we want to talk real quick. We don't have that much time about what the defense is going to do this week when they take up the case. What do you expect?
I think they're going to, continue on the trend. Apparently, they have a lot of witnesses, so I'm not sure who they're going to be calling. Initially, there was a list of 70-something witnesses that they were going to call. So I think ultimately, I'm not sure what they're going to put on. They may call. It'd be interesting to see if they want to call Dallas Kennedy back to see if they can elicit more questions from her. Hopefully, they did some due diligence and spoke to her outside the presence of the prosecutors.
Right. The question will be, will George Burch take the stand? It looks like it will. Looks like he will, and that's when things will get very interesting. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. And speaking of live, we are covering the live case of George Burch out of Wisconsin. As soon as we have a live feed in that courtroom, we're going to make sure to go to it. You're not going to want to miss anything in this really explosive case about a man who's charged with first-degree intentional homicide of a young mother. But his team is claiming, his defense team is claiming that he didn't do it, but that it was the boyfriend of the victim in this case. I want to talk right now about what we heard on Friday. We heard all of this testimony about DNA, and DNA is a huge factor in this case. I want to again bring on our guest for the morning, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Vinoo Varghese. Let's break down some of the DNA, okay? They said that Burch's DNA, the defendant in this case, they matched swabs taken from the victim's ankles, right wrist, right forearm, right hand fingernail clippings, left arm, left palm, and non-sperm in certain private areas, okay? Does that match up so far with A, the prosecution's theory, and also the defense's theory?
I think it actually can support both. So for the prosecution's theory, they're arguing that this was a beyond sex.
Okay.
Right, so that this was a sexual assault. And the forensic examiner said that it could be indicative of a sexual assault or something more than casual sex. But then on cross-examination, the defense asked her, well, it could be just consistent with sex, and she said, yes. I mean, this is the issue that you have with this, is that the prosecution can spin it any way that they want to. The defense has an ethical obligation in this case to make sure that they bring on experts to challenge the nature of the type of evidence that they found. So look, here's the issue for the defense lawyers. They're not gonna argue that if they're gonna go with the theory that Dietrich did it, then saying that, trying to challenge the DNA and whether it's reliable or not is not the way to go.
Okay, well, let's talk about Dietrich and evidence here. They tested his Air Jordan sneakers, okay? And the pattern on the bottom of the sneakers, it had a herringbone-type pattern that matched a pattern found on Vanderheiden's back, on Nicole's back, okay? That would indicate that why would his foot be on her back? Then again, they tested it for blood, and they were able to determine that there was no blood on the right shoe, while a swab on the left shoe was inconclusive, but they were able to rule out that it was Vanderheiden's DNA on the shoes. Despite that, can't you still have a pair of items, a pair of shoes, that might not have the victim's DNA on it? But if you can match the pattern, isn't that even stronger?
I agree, and I think that the defense will exploit this, or they should be exploiting it, because from their perspective, as long as they can throw out enough out there to cast doubt on their client's guilt, right? That's all they have to do, right? If there's enough doubt that the jury's going to sit there and say, there's a chance this guy maybe didn't do it, then I think they'll win, and he'll walk, because the jury's going to take this seriously. As terrible as it is, the situation here is that you have potentially somebody else who did it. Now, in most homicides and cases when you deal with this stuff, they're not sure, or the defendant has a motive, right? So the prosecution comes in where the defendant, this was his baby mother, he was angry, he was, she was cheating, all that stuff. You got none of that stuff here for Burch. It's a casual one-night stand, and why would he kill her? Now, the problem the defense is going to have is they're going to have to put Burch on the stand, because how else are they going to get this theory out? Right?
Well, let's talk about that. Again, we're covering the George Burch case, the man that was charged with first-degree intentional homicide in connection with the death of Nicole Vanderheiden. And as we just explained, George Burch's DNA was all over her. Cell phone evidence from his cell phone indicates that he was in 4 key locations that night, including the crime scene and where her body was ultimately found. Now, despite all that evidence, the defense is not refuting much of it. They're saying that he didn't do it, but it was Douglas Dietrich, that George and Nicole had sexual relations that night, that Doug knocked George out, killed Nicole, and when George woke up, he was forced at gunpoint to help get rid of the body. Okay, we're talking about George Burch. We believe he will take the stand this week. Doesn't he have to take the stand this week in order to present the case that the defense is going with, to present the theory that the defense is going with?
Yes, unless there's some other witness that they have who can testify to what Dietrich did. Otherwise, yeah, he's going to have to take the stand.
But that's a danger of putting the defendant on the stand, right? Can you explain that to our viewers? What is the danger of putting a defendant on the stand?
Well, if you're going to put a defendant on the stand, you're going to have to make sure that he's ready, that he's going to be able to withstand cross-examination, that he's going to appear likable to the jury. Because ultimately, if he appears likable, I think that'll go a long way towards his acquittal. Now, Dietrich here, he's not very, he's a mixed bag. I don't think there's
You could
anything.
take him one way, you could take him another
Sure,
way.
but in either way, whether you think he's a bad guy or you think he's just just a bad boyfriend, neither scenario is positive for him, right? So, he doesn't come across like beyond awful, but he doesn't come across positive either. So, the defense, if Burch comes out and he comes out and he's sympathetic and he shows and he can express his emotion, I think that there's a good chance that the defense that he could walk. But the danger is, of course, that he becomes unlikable. If he comes across the slightest bit unlikable, he's toast.
And that's what we're going to analyze here when he does take the stand, or hopefully takes the stand, whether or not he came across likable and whether or not he came across credible. And we're going to cover that because we do believe that the state will rest their case, maybe even today or tomorrow. And as soon as that happens, the defense will begin their case and why they believe Douglas Dietrich is in fact the killer. Now, we do want to let our viewers know that we're waiting for a live feed into the courtroom. What we know right now is that they are going over some preliminary issues in the courtroom, but as soon as the testimony begins, we're going to go right back to it. You're not going to want to miss anything in this very interesting case that has captured the nation's attention for multiple reasons. We're going to go to a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about Burch. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. We are waiting for a live feed right now out of a Wisconsin case in that courtroom. We're talking about the George Burch case. As soon as we do have a live feed, we're going to make sure to go to it. And this case is about George Burch, who is charged with first-degree intentional homicide in connection with the death of a young mother named Nicole Vanderheiden. And she died back in May of 2016. Her body was found 3 miles from her home. She suffered blunt force trauma to the head, and she was strangled to death. The question becomes, who did it? George Burch is on trial, and despite overwhelming evidence against him, his defense team is saying that it wasn't him, but it was Nicole's boyfriend, Douglas Dietrich. What we've been examining this morning is Douglas's testimony from last week. And I want to play for you right now is under cross-examination, you hear the defense team really picking apart their relationship, the relationship between Nicole and Doug, and some difficulties that Doug had in that relationship. And why that's important is it leads to motive. The more difficult the relationship, you could try to understand why Doug may have had the motive to kill Nicole. Let's listen in.
What do you mean you weren't feeling great about yourself?
Well, I just felt, not going to work and taking that much time off for a good reason, and they understood that as well. But it was, it was 5-6 months after he was born, and it was time, to get back. And I had worked, some days here and there, and I was doing some work from home as well. And it was, when I'd work at home, it'd be like an hour here, and then, caring for Dylan and helping Nikki out, and then an hour or two, it was kind of like pieceworking back in. I wasn't in at a set time and done at a set time ever.
Which room did Dylan sleep in then at the Berkeley residence?
Dylan slept in our room, the master bedroom.
Who typically fed Dylan?
Well, he was breastfeeding, so up until I think it was about a week or so prior to her passing, that was this when at a 6-month doctor's appointment was when the doctor said to start transitioning to some solid foods and some baby foods, and forget it was still like 6 breastfeedings and every 3 to 4 hours, and then to work in and see how he tolerated some of the purified foods and all that.
And earlier, and we've heard throughout a lot of this process, Nikki was a great mother.
Yes, she was.
Nikki fed Dylan, right? She changed Dylan. She played with Dylan. she bathed Dylan, she cared for Dylan.
Yes, she did.
How much of that did you do for Dylan?
I did a lot of that as well. I mean, obviously I couldn't breastfeed him, but I changed, I would say, half the diapers, at least. I mean, I had no problem changing the diapers. I remember changing his first poopy diaper in the hospital. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. It was great. And when Nikki would be feeding, I'd be either playing games. If it was a weeknight, I'd be playing with Tyler and Michaela, and Tyler liked watching Walker, Texas Ranger. We'd watch that every night during the week and after dinner, because I'd come home from work. Because I was working for, a period of time there. I think it was maybe March, April, when I did start, making some days of work, and I'd come home and Nikki would have dinner already, and we'd sit down and have a dinner together as a family, and we'd, watch some TV and get ready for bed and play some games, whatever.
You talked about Dylan at the hospital. Do you remember how long he was when he was born?
He was 21 inches,
How much did he weigh?
7 pounds.
After May 21st, you told law enforcement really you were terrified of having to take care of Dylan and that you were going to need help with that.
I believe I said I was like, I was scared. I thought, and it was kind of scary. I mean, Nikki did do a lot for Dylan. I mean, she was his mother, and breastfeeding, that whole, it was something new to me. I didn't, I was learning in that 6 months of having my first child, it was a learning process, and getting accustomed to that, and, I was seeing all the good and everything that, the joys of having a baby.
And you were been defined as the irresponsible friend. Does that come into it as well?
The
irresponsible friend.
irresponsible friend? I don't know what you're referring to.
Why would Greg refer to you as the irresponsible one of the group?
I don't know.
You said that Dietrich Homes, it's a family business?
Yes.
And are your parents in charge of that right now?
Yes, my father is the president.
And then you work for him right now?
Yes, I'm actually a subcontractor. I have my own corporation.
That's Douglas Dietrich being cross-examined by the defense about what his life with Nicole was like and him being a father. Real quick, Vinoo, I know we don't have much time. How do you do under cross-examination about his life or his troubles?
In that segment, he did fine. And I think the defense has a problem. That was a very weak cross-examination, at least the clip you just played. It wasn't compelling. It was very kind of boring. And he actually came across reasonable, because he was saying about being a new father, he's being reasonable, there's a learning experience. That was not helpful to the defense.
Well, yeah, that's not good for the defense, because they're pointing the finger at him as the real killer. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll go back into the courtroom. Welcome back to Law and Crime Live, everybody. We're covering the George Burch case out of Wisconsin, and we are waiting for a live feed in the courtroom. Right now, the judge is working out some preliminary issues with the attorneys. And just as a recap, this is the case of George Burch, a man who was charged with first-degree intentional homicide in connection with the death of Nicole Vanderheiden. Nicole was a beautiful young mother from Wisconsin. From all accounts, from people who have testified about her, she was a great mom. You see her there with her young son. Really a beautiful, beautiful woman. And it's taken in the prime of her life, trying to make sense of why this happened. And as the prosecution is charging and going after George Burch and saying he's the man who did it, the defense team, his defense team, is saying he didn't do it, but it was Nicole's boyfriend, the person she lived with and shared a son with, Douglas Dietrich. And we've been playing you testimony from him earlier today, and we're going to keep showing you that because he was such a critical witness for both the state and the defense. What I want to play for you right now, as we wait for this live feed, is when the news broke back in May of 2016, when a young girl was found in this field, And Doug didn't know at first whether or not it was Nicole. Well, this is his story. And I want to play for you his reaction when he heard the news and what followed. Take a look.
Because you were the suspect in Nicole's death.
At that time, I was not told that I was a suspect. I had saw those news articles that there was a missing body. I had a lot of feelings and thoughts going through my head and saying, praying that it's not her. And then at the same time, I'm thinking, oh my God, it is her. And it was just a very emotional time for me.
They called you the following days, correct?
They called me on Sunday at some point, yeah.
And they scheduled a meeting to collect your DNA?
Yeah, I think there was a couple calls back and forth. He said he would call me back, and then he gave me his number, and I think I called him back, and I don't really recall who called who back, and we did speak, I think like 2 times, maybe 3 times.
So that's a yes.
On Sunday, yes, yes.
And you chose not to give a DNA sample.
That is correct, after I had gotten some advice.
You chose not to give a DNA sample.
I was kind of told not to, so, I mean, I was willing to give one.
And you made the choice not to.
I guess, yeah, yes.
And you stayed in contact with Dallas too, because she was concerned.
I believe I spoke with her a time or two after, on Sunday maybe. I don't know. I was talking to a lot of people, and people were calling me.
And she was upset.
I don't recall even the context of any of the conversations really on Sunday. I was a wreck.
She said, "What happened, Doug?" And you said, "I don't know. She hit her head."
I don't recall saying anything about her hitting her head at all.
You told Dallas, "I don't know. She hit her head."
I do not recall that, sir.
When you woke up on May 21st, Nikki's vehicle was in the garage, correct?
Yes.
And you drove that vehicle on May 21st?
No, I did not.
Why wouldn't you drive that vehicle to try to look for Nikki?
Because I did not have a key for it.
Doug, investigators found the keys in your house on a key rack that was actually labeled keys. How did you not know those were in your house?
Objection, Your Honor. That is in fact not in evidence, and it's not accurate.
Sustained. And then moving on, Doug, to the evening of May 23rd, you were at your parents' house on Euro Lane,
That's, yeah, on Monday, yes.
and you received a call from Sergeant Steffens.
Yes, I did.
On direct examination, you said that call made you nervous.
Well, yeah, she said she was coming over to ask me more questions, and,
So that call made you nervous.
not really nervous. I was just, a lot of thoughts were going through my mind. I was just emotional wreck at, that entire time.
You testified yesterday that call made you nervous. Is that a yes or a no?
Yeah, partially I was nervous,
Is that a yes or a no?
Wait, let's not badger the witness. He's testified yesterday that it made him nervous. Let's go on to the next question.
And then the police did show up.
Yeah, 15 minutes or so after that.
At that point, the police knew Nicole had been murdered, correct?
I believe so. They did not say anything, but
They knew she was murdered 118 feet from your house.
I don't know what they knew at that point.
You knew all along what happened to Nikki.
No, I did not.
The police are at your parents' door and they make you come outside, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I just stepped out, yes.
They put you in handcuffs,
Yep,
and that's when the Brown County Sheriff's Office arrested you and told you were under arrest for the murder of Nicole Vanderheiden.
that is correct.
I have no further questions.
All right, everybody, we are now going to be showing you a live feed into the George Burch courtroom. That's right, we have a live feed. A new witness is going to be taking the stand. And let's just talk a little bit about what you just saw. You saw Douglas Dietrich again taking the stand. He was under cross-examination. Vinoo, when you're watching that, the judge stepped to his defense. Stop badgering the witness. We talked privately about this. What do you think about the judge in this case?
As I said, it's a bad draw for the defense. The guy was the former DA, not an assistant DA, the district attorney of that county for 30 years. Upon his elevation to becoming a judge, his retirement from the DA, the guy gave an interview and he's talking about his 90% conviction rate. If you're a prosecutor, you shouldn't be talking about conviction rates. Your office's spokesman can say what your office's conviction rate is or your personal conviction rate.
I never heard you talking about conviction rates. That's not something Vinoo would do.
I don't talk about it. That was a long time ago that I was a prosecutor. I try to forget that part of my my life. Now I joke around a little bit, but this guy's an interesting guy. He's a celebrity down there.
He was
a celebrity sportscaster one day on the local news. He is actually on the board of directors for the Green Bay Packers. I mean, this is a very interesting guy.
You can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up, and that's what makes this case interesting from multiple levels. There's a lot of things that makes this case interesting. We are going to go to a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to go directly into the George Burch courtroom. You don't want to miss anything, so stay tuned. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to Law&Crime Live, everybody. We're covering the George Burch case right now. This is out of Wisconsin. There is a live feed in the courtroom, but there's a sidebar between the attorneys and the judge as they work that out. Let's talk about who the witness is right now. The witness on the stand is Ed Jackson. He owns Jackson Automotive Clinic, and he is friends with Burch. Says that he met him 20 years ago in New York. The two became friends, and Burch lived with Ed, again, the witness on the stand, and his wife, Linda, at the time of the Vander Heyden murder. I'm here again with criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Vinoo Varghese. A friend of Burch brought on by the state. Are they going to try to show what was he doing at the time of the murder? What was his reaction like after the murder? What did he do? What kind of witness do you think this will be?
I think it's just that. I mean, and the question, this begs the question of what is this guy going to testify about, right? We're speculating here, but we haven't heard anything, and in pretrial motions, there should have been motions to exclude certain testimony. By this point, the defense will have gotten some aspect of what this guy is going to testify about, and they should have moved to preclude this testimony if he's got nothing positive to say as far as George.
I think this might be the first witness, somebody that actually knows Burch very well, and it'd be interesting to hear about what George Burch is like from a secondhand person, because we've seen so far the state putting off evidence about what the crime was, right, how the investigation worked, and then trying to rule out Douglas Dietrich as the murderer. It's going to be interesting hearing the second part of the prosecution's case.
I think however they go, the defense has real problems here. As we were watching the previous clip, the cross-examination by that lawyer was boring.
You're talking about the defense attorney?
Yes.
Okay.
It was boring. I mean, he's got this guy in the stand, and I understand that the judge has a rule that nobody can stand when you're asking questions, which is a terrible rule because
Right.
it doesn't allow people. But the guy is just sitting there reading questions. I mean, this is a massive case with national coverage. He should have practiced his questions.
Maybe he didn't need to do more. But then again, I would have liked to see a little bit more flavor.
It was bad.
Again, for our viewers watching, that's a live feed into the George Burch courtroom. Everyone is standing. The jury, it appears, might be being brought out right now, or maybe being brought in. We're going to have to see what's going on. But Ed Jackson is on the stand. As soon as we have a live feed in the courtroom, some audio, we're going to listen in. Again, Ed Jackson, there he is right there. He is a friend of George Burch, and he was on the stand. And now it appears he left. We're going to have to wait and see what happens there. They might be working off a preliminary issue. As soon as we have an update, we'll make sure to go back to it. Again, we were talking also about the fact that trying to show that Burch is the one that did this. What more does the prosecution need to do before they ultimately rest their case?
I don't think they have to do much more. I mean, in terms of the evidence they've put out, they have enough stuff linking him to the case. They're going to have their big hole is the why, what the motive is. So, I mean, that's something they're going to have to deal with, and will be interesting to see how they deal with. The defense already is at a loss here. just look at the difference between Dietrich and Burch.
Physical differences?
Physical difference.
The
Optics.
ponytail doesn't help George Burch. I'll be the first one to say it.
Why is he not in court with a blazer on, showing respect? Now, if this is the guy always dressed his whole life in this ponytail and things, you know, I get it.
Don't
right?
make him something he's not.
Right. You don't want to turn him into this, because the jury's going to see that, particularly if his picture at the time of arrest shows him to be this, you know, ponytail, bearded guy. However, they can make him look neater, right? They could have, you know, maybe kept the beard, got rid of the ponytail, put on a suit, you know, put a blazer on. The guy, Dietrich, he looks good.
Yeah.
You know, he's this presentable, very
Clean-cut
handsome
guy.
clean cut, doesn't look like a killer, right? There's, if you asked me, if you
Shocker.
put two-
Appearances matter. Appearances
if you
matter.
put both guys before a jury, say, who do you think did it? Everyone's going to say Burch.
You know as well as anybody, at the end of the day, you could put off all the evidence you want. You could put up all the legal standards that the jury should follow, everything, the facts, everything. But these are human beings, and there's only so much that they can take away those separate feelings, those separate assumptions, that they can move those to the side and judge straight by the law. I'm cynical. What can I say? But you make a good
more
point.
cynical than you, I think, having been in this industry.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, we talked about what the defense did. Now I want to show you the prosecution fighting back. So when a witness comes on the stand, after the defense cross-examines the witness, the prosecution has the opportunity for redirect, a re-examination of the witness, to try to fight back a little bit about what was said during cross-examination. I want to play you again. This is the testimony of Doug Dietrich, the boyfriend, Nicole's boyfriend, who the defense is saying is the ultimate killer here. I want to show you the state fighting back under redirect when he was on the stand. Take a look.
Doug, were you ever charged? Is there a formal charging document charging you with the murder of Nicole Vanderheiden?
No, I was not.
Doug, you were asked on cross-examination about your ownership of some guns. You own a handgun?
No, I do not.
Mr. Sugar had asked you if you took a shower before meeting with police officers. When did you take a shower on May 21st?
It was after I made the call for the missing persons report, and I was wearing the clothes from the night before, and I needed to just feel cleaned up and refreshed, I guess.
Would it be typical for you to take a shower during the day
Yes, definitely.
prior to meeting with people?
Yes.
The clothing that you were wearing at the bar the previous night, you were wearing that exact same clothing when you met with the sheriff's office? Excuse me, the pants at least and the shoes?
I was wearing the same pants and same shoes.
And the undershirt, the t-shirt that you were wearing, that 94-7 t-shirt, you still wearing that the next day?
I was still wearing that the next day in the morning, up until I did take the shower at 4:30 approximately.
Doug, I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibit number 43. Can you identify that exhibit?
That is a picture of my son and me in the morning or afternoon. I don't exactly recall when it was, but I sent that to Nikki in a Snapchat message directly to her.
That's the message you sent to Nikki on the 21st. And what was the purpose of sending that Snapchat to her?
Just mommy and daddy daddy and Dylan are here waiting for mommy to get home, just to see if she would respond at all and see if she would open the Snapchat. You can tell if she's opened it, and then, I would see that her phone was on, and then if she was ignoring me.
Again, that's the testimony of Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend of Nicole Vanderheiden, the victim in the George Burch case. Again, we were showing you a live feed in the George Burch case, but there's a legal issue being resolved right now between the attorneys and the judge, and it resolves, it's about the defense trying to say that the state is putting in evidence to besmirch the character of George Burch, their client, trying to dirty his character, and it's not relevant to the case at hand. As they work out those issues, we're talking about this case, and we're going to, as soon as we do have an update or a live feed, we're going to make sure to go to it. In the meantime, I want to sign off with our very good guest for the morning, Vinoo Varghese. Vinoo, it was great to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
And thank you. I can't wait to have you back to talk more about this case and other cases here on Law and Crime Live. I do want to let our viewers know that there is another case we're carefully monitoring out of New Mexico. And you don't want to miss this one. We're hoping for a live feed in it as well. It is the case of Bradley Farrington. Now, he was a former Silver City police officer who is now charged with the murder of his wife. Now, his wife, Cassie Marie Farrington, who was 23 years old, she was found fully clothed, floating face down in a bathtub full of water on March 24th, 2014. This is according to an autopsy report. Now, the couple had a history of all this kinds of domestic violence, and they were separated and in the middle of a divorce, and they were fighting over custody of their children at the time of her murder. You can kind of see what I'm getting at here. So Bradley Farrington, after many loops and bounds, is now on trial for her murder. As soon as we have a live feed, we're going to talk more about that case as well. And there's a lot at stake for multiple people here today. So as we wait for the Farrington feed and as we wait to continue our feed in the Burch case, I want to show you right now the testimony of someone else in the Burch case. Now, we showed you all the testimony of Douglas Dietrich. What I want to play for you right now is the testimony of Aaron Kalinsky. This is a friend of Dietrich talking about what happened the night Nicole went missing and talking about the arguments that she and Doug got into that night. Take a look.